So this lecture is called Insects Number 2. And there is some overlap, but some occasional overlap. Repetition is not a bad thing when trying to learn new topics. One of them I originally created years ago, and the other one was created by a former research representative of the University of California, Dr. Frankie Lamb. And he's no longer with our University of California group here in Monterey County, but I liked his presentation. I liked some of the things he pointed out, and so I wanted to share it with the class, and I've been sharing it ever since. So if we look at all life on Earth, excuse me, we look at all life on Earth, a big chunk of them can be considered ecologically plants, even though they're technically not plants when we're looking at algae, bacteria, and fungi. These are other kingdoms. They are still called the flora from an ecological standpoint. They're in a broader plant-like category, algae, bacteria, and fungi, which really aren't plants. The true plants are only the ferns, mosses, evergreens, and other hornworts, liverworts, some strange things that are included here, and the flowering plants. But plants, in terms of the number of species, only make up what appears to be roughly a third of the pie here. All animals make up even less. And animals, again, the protozoans technically aren't animals from an animal taxonomist standpoint. The protozoans are protist or protozoan organisms that are not technically animals, but they're animal-like organisms. But when I say other animals, that's only everything except the arthropods, which are also animals. And if I include the arthropods, there's all these things we call other arthropods, and the arthropods are the joint foot, right? Remember that one? And other arthropods includes things like arachnids, crustaceans, and myriapoda. So all of those things, shrimp and crabs and ticks and the roly-poly bugs, or woodlice as they're called, millipedes, centipedes, and on, the non-insects all fit into this other arthropod category, all of them. And then we have insects. The other insects, bugs are actually a type of insect, flies, bees, wasps, moths and butterflies, beetles. All of these are insects. And if we draw a line across here, follow this line and draw it straight across, insects account for half of all the species of organisms on Earth. Half, 50% are insects. Not just arthropods, but insects. Arthropods account for more than half when we include all the other non-insect arthropods. And then if we include that with animals, animals clearly dominate plants in terms of the diversity of species. There's roughly twice as many species of animals than there are plants. But even though half of all species of living things on Earth is an insect, only about 5% of those can truly be considered a pest. Most of them, the other 95%, are the good guys. About 50% of all species are insects. I already showed you that here, but here it is for your memory aid and study. That's something you want to remember. 50% of all species are insects. So we already know about the classification. If it's purely some old timers plant view of the world, and you're just talking about botany and plant taxonomy, it's kingdom, division, class, order, family, genus, species. If it's a general biology or animals, we're talking kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So an example of this, the American cockroach is an animal, Animalia, in the phylum Arthropoda, the arthropods, which make up over half of the species on Earth. And then class Insecta, the Hexapoda, and that is exactly about half of all species on Earth are insects, Insecta. Then we have order, Blattaria, Blattidae, Periplaneta, Periplaneta americana, the American cockroach. So as we already know, insects have a 3 body parts in a bilateral body organization, body symmetry. Bilaterals like we are. We can draw a line through our body down the center, which each half is roughly a mirror image of the other half. Not exactly, but we are, you know, our hands, our eyes, we have roughly a bilateral symmetry. Unlike a starfish, which is called radial symmetry, because you can draw a line, as long as you go through the right plane, you can draw a line in many different ways and come up with 2 roughly similar mirror images. But most advanced life forms have this bilateral symmetry with a distinct head and tail end. And the 3 body parts for an insect is head, thorax, and abdomen. They also have a very distinct exo or external skeleton. And there are other parts, the antennae, the compound eyes, the front wing, hind wing, legs commonly are for insects. The legs and wings attach to the thorax, not to the abdomen. And you may not have wings, or you may have the wings only at certain stages of the insect's life cycle. Now, what's important in this presentation is the concept of metamorphosis. And so I'm going to give you some examples of metamorphosis that I want you to know. But this is a change in body form through which insects or other organisms pass in development or developing to adults. So a pollywog turns into a frog, or is it a tadpole turns into a frog and a pollywog turns into a toad? I don't know. But that's a type of metamorphosis as well in animals, or excuse me, in vertebrate animals. So don't worry about memorizing something on this particular example, but this is just an example of something that goes from eggs to early instars molting, late instars adult. It's going through a type of metamorphosis, but I'll give you the specific examples on the slides coming up. So what I want you to know on these slides is the name of the type of metamorphosis, the example, and what do we call the young. So ametamorphosis, there's no metamorphosis. They just grow like we grow. They're small when they're babies and they get bigger until they're adults. And there are some changes. You know, a baby human doesn't look like an adult human. You can tell the difference. It's more than just size, but there's nothing you could truly call a metamorphosis or a distinct change. So they just get bigger and grow up. And the example here is silverfish. Maybe you've seen those. They like dry areas, maybe old boxes in a closet somewhere. They get into paperwork and all kinds of stuff. Incomplete metamorphosis. So it is a metamorphosis, but it, under close scrutiny, has some differences to a complete metamorphosis. And so we categorize it separately. And here is a mayfly. A mayfly is a type of insect that loves the water, and so it's a great food source for fish in many cases. And the naiad, as they're called, the young or naiad forms actually live in the water. And so the adults hang out around water sources. And because they hang out around water sources, they're also really good fishing insects. You don't use the actual mayflies. You can't get those suckers on a hook and use them. But what we do is mimic a mayfly adult. We imitate a mayfly adult using flies. If you go fly fishing, there are different kinds of flies. And some of the flies.
Call from Triano Genan.
And you can have the.
Call from Triano
I'm losing track of my thought. Anyway, you can go fly fishing.
Call
I'll be right back.
Triano Genan.